goal line situations and where the other coach was an idiot. But that fourth down decision stuff it can separate teams now. You got old school and new school, and the new school coaches are much more successful.
I really like the issue of, you're going a lot of levels down, so to speak, and applying it to NFL. You've got your glamour stats, and anybody that's handicapping probably, may or may not even look at a lot of them because there's so many other ways to evaluate what's going on. Then you've spoken about having these stats, and Ron's the same way, where you get a sack total or you get another stat where it requires manual adjustment. So I've got 3 questions in one here. Is explain a little bit about the micro breakdown of some of the stats that you use, and you kind of work off of those and change those. I know you mentioned passes broken up, quarterbacks, returning starters. And then also, how much do you do manually by pen and paper versus computer?
Well, I have the model, but I think a big key to the success is adjusting the model based on current personnel. I'm very good at figuring out how much a player is worth and adjusting for it. Now, in the NFL, you may know that the line really only adjusts for quarterbacks and possibly a half a point for an elite receiver or something like that. It should be more like you might adjust the game, 0.8 points for an offensive lineman, for an offensive tackle being out, might be. And we've got all these metrics now that can measure blocking win rates and stuff like that. And we know how much blocking win rates correlates to pressure on a quarterback and how much pressure correlates to yards per pass play or success in a pass play. So there are now ways to put values on offensive linemen, defensive linemen, defensive tackles. Who knew how to judge a defensive tackle back in the day? Now we do. Stop, run stop rates and pressures and all that stuff. And now we have enough data to understand how much each of these statistics is worth in points. And based on who your backup is, a lot of it. I used to make a lot of money in the NFL adjusting for when defensive backs, especially corners, would get injured and would barely make a difference in the line. It could be like, I don't know, it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be Jalen Ramsey or something. It could be a good cornerback. But if the backup quarterback sucks, it depends on your scheme. Like, there's a few, I don't know when it was 10 years ago or something. The Baltimore Ravens had a good starting secondary, and they had a solid nickelback, but their 6th, 7th, their depth was horrible. And they played a lot of press coverage. And one of the corners got injured, and one of the backups came in, and he was getting toasted. I'm like, oh, okay, worse than a normal replacement. So I started adjusting to that. Then another cornerback got injured, and I'm like, oh my God, the floodgates open. They went from a team allowing like 5.5 yards per pass play to a team allowing like 7.5 yards per pass play over the last half of the season. And that's a ton of value. That's like 6 points.
Yeah.
And they weren't making the adjustment. So I find that defensive backs are worth more than people think, college and pro. Linebackers are replaceable, like running backs. A star linebacker will go out of a game. I remember Patrick Willis got hurt for the Niners one year. It's like, oh, Patrick Willis is out. He's the best linebacker in the game. Didn't matter. There's a Pittsburgh Steelers had a linebacker that went as an all-pro. He was out for like 6 or 7 games. Didn't matter. Mostly linebackers do not actually make a difference unless they're pass rushing linebackers. But generally, linebackers don't make that much of a difference. All of them at the NFL level can fill a hole and tackle. That's all you need. But there are certain position groups that I found offer more value than the market thinks they do. And certain that have less value than the market thinks they do. But in the NFL, they generally don't adjust for anything other than quarterbacks, except for extreme cases of an elite, like Christian McCaffrey or something like that. And mostly running backs are only valuable if they catch passes.
Right.
As far as running the ball, there's maybe 2 or 3 that make a difference, running the ball when they're out. And actually, you want your star running back to be out if you're a run-based team. Ezekiel Elliott or
you're going to get extra value.
Derrick Henry, because now you're going to throw more, which is what you want to do in the NFL. Yeah. So there's no value. Even an elite running back that runs the ball is not going to. There's no value in that, because if he's out, they're going to run the ball. They're going to pass the ball more, which is great. It's going to help them. Only if a running back catches balls out of the backfield doesn't matter. So me adjusting for injuries, lineup changes, stuff like that, I get a lot of value from that. So over the years, I've kept track of my model as it's first done, and then my model after I made all the adjustments, and the adjustments add about 2% to my win percentage than if I just went with the model blindly. The difference between 55% and 53%, and that is huge.
Yeah,
in sports betting. So I think that's where I get a lot of my value, is adjusting my model based on personnel other than just the quarterback, which is obvious, is already in the line. And I think a lot of the analytics guys and the young guys running algorithm, they're all quantitative guys, and they've come over from the stock market. Now they're betting sports. They just run their models. Yeah. That's the model. I'm like, all right, well, now I have value, because now I'm adjusting for things that aren't in your model, that you're not adjusting for. And that's where I find the value more now than when I did 15 or 20 years ago when I had the best model. And now people have caught up to what I was doing 15 or 20 years ago. Now there's not as much value in that, but there's value knowing that they're not adjusting for everything that I'm adjusting for. Whereas back in the day, the odds makers might have adjusted a little bit more for a star cornerback being out, where nowadays it's not part of the algorithm, so they don't adjust for it. So you have to know what the market's doing to know where the value is.
Just quickly, I find a lot of benefit. When I go back and I autopsy 2021 NFL, which I still need to do, I go through each and every game manually, and I write out week by week over the last 7-8 years, all kinds, every parameter you can think of. I do it manually because I feel it sinks in better than
I agree with that.
Quickly, before Ron blows up, how much of the work that you do is manual and you get special attention versus stuff you're reading off what your computer spits out?
Well, the model's pretty easy to run. I mean, it's available as soon as I've adjusted all the box scores. I go through every college box score and adjust it, take out, kneel downs and passes broken up, punts that's, snaps that sail over the punter's head for a 20-yard loss or counted as a negative 20-yard running play. So I clean up the stats of every single game. I also look for randomness, like an 80-yard screen pass, or something like that. And I'll make a note of it, and I'll know to adjust for that. But now that part of that's being done now by success rates, like I said.
Yeah.
So part of that's being done automatically. So that stuff's, once I spend the entire day Sunday going over the Saturday box score, and also taking out garbage time stats. When did the defensive starters leave the game? What were those stats? Mark those down, adjust for those. And this is another thing that I do detail-wise that other people don't do. If Clemson's played a bunch of shitty teams and they've got their starters playing most of the fourth quarter, or Alabama or something, and playing most of their backups in the fourth quarter, if they're playing another mediocre team and they're favored by 30, I'll just leave those in. But if they're playing a good team, then I'll only look at the metrics when their starters are in. So it depends on a scenario. So that's some of the detail I do is garbage time stats, knowing what those are, knowing when to use them, knowing when to take them out, depending on who the opponent is in a particular game. Plus the adjustments I do are all manual. Looking at lineup changes, and it could be offense or defense. Most of them are offensive, but I have ways to value defensive players being out as well. When Catalon from Arkansas, the All-American safety, went out, Arkansas's pass defense went from being good to not good as soon, week 5 or week 6, as soon as he went out. All right, well, I'm going to note that, and I'm going to adjust for it initially based on his past, statistics and passes broken up and all that other stuff. And then as the data's rolling in on the games without him, then I'm adjusting, I'm refining that adjustment. And not only will I adjust Arkansas's defense for the games that he was out, I'll adjust every opponent that Arkansas has played depending on which version of the defense they faced. and I'll do that for defenses. Did you face Texas Tech with their starting quarterback, or did you face Texas Tech when Columbia was their starting quarterback? And I know the difference between those quarterbacks, and I'll adjust your defensive metrics based on who you played. Last year, the biggest example was Notre Dame. Notre Dame's defense faced, I think, 5 backup quarterbacks. Yeah. And it was extreme. It was like facing Virginia without Armstrong, facing Georgia Tech without their starting quarterback, and the backup Yates was dreadful. They faced a bunch of teams where there's a big difference between the quarterback they faced and the level overall, the starting quarterback. And the adjustment to Notre Dame's defense at the end of the year, after adjusting for the quarterbacks they played relative to the average of those teams, ended up being about half a yard per pass play, which works out to about 1.5 or so of value. So they were 1.5 worse, or maybe 2 points worse in reality defensively than their stats, than their compensated statistics would normally show. And one of the reasons I ended up betting on Oklahoma State is I just thought, when they played in the bowl game, and Oklahoma State won that game. Notre Dame scored late to make it close, but Oklahoma State won that game and scored 37 points, I think, on that Notre Dame defense, which was vastly overrated because they played a bunch of backups who were terrible. So it's not only doing all the adjustments manually for how the difference between one quarterback and another on a team, but adjusting every defense that team's played based on which quarterback they faced. So all that stuff takes me a long. That's another day right there doing all that stuff. I mean, that's a lot of work.
Ron, anything that you have that he hasn't spoken about yet?
Well, that was good that you had the follow-up, because it took half my question about the box score management out, because I don't think people realize that college box score manipulation is a really scientific kind of thing. Sacks are taken out of the run totals for colleges.
Yeah, and
they're not taken out.
For me, they're passes. They're pass plays.
Yeah.
Right.
So I've got to adjust all the numbers.
You know what else is funny about this? Other things I adjust for in box scores. I also do a search for fumble, and I look at every time a fumble. If you're a running back and you run 5 yards and fumble it 25 yards forward, and it gets recovered by the defense, you get credit for a 30-yard run. And I don't even know if you knew that.
Well, I could see different things, there where I see negative 36 on a play.
Well, that's right. That's like the punt.
So I see it the other way.
Over the punter's head. Right. So those are obvious. But do you know a 5-yard run that gets fumbled 25 yards forward and recovered by the defense or recovered by anybody, you get credit for the ball rolling on the ground. That running back will get credit for a 30-yard run when he ran 5 yards and fumbled it away. And it just happened to bounce forward 25 yards. I have to look at every fumble and adjust for that too, or it's stuff like that. And maybe it's just over detailed, but that's just the way I am. I'm over detailed, and I want to know if a 30-yard run was a 5-yard run with a 25-yard fumble forward, and I'll make.
If you take out the kneel downs, you take out the sacks, you take out these weird fumble plays, or the punter trying to run on 4th down and stuff like that.
Yep.
You can find hidden line of scrimmage value in running games when they're playing. It depends on who they're playing the next week and stuff like that. But I think that's part of the underrated value of the hard work that you do, that we do when we're looking at, we're not just trusting, they won 24-12 and they ran for 180 yards.
There was one game.
That's not happening.
Now, there was one game I bet on. It was Louisiana Lafayette, and I forgot who they were playing. It was a few years ago. They were playing another elite team. It was like a Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night football game or something. They had an
App State, probably.
I forget what it was. I bet I could look it up here. I have it right in front of me. They were I can't read without my glasses. But they had an all-league long snapper. Guy was first team all-league long snapper.
2 or 3 missed snaps, right? 4. I missed it by 1.
4 missed snaps for a negative 140 yards of running.
Yeah, I watched that.
And so people were like, and I won the bet. I still won the bet. They were like +1, and they won 19-17. And they had 3 field goal snaps go over the head and a punt snap go over the head. And people are like, well, you were lucky to win that game. They got outgained by 50 yards. I'm like, they had a negative 140 in snaps going over the punter's head. They outgained that team by 90 yards. I wasn't lucky to win that game. I would have been unlucky to lose it. You know, people see the stats and go, oh, they got outgained by what? I'm like, they don't realize, I mean, that's extreme. You're not going to find a game where there's 140 yards of snaps going over the punter's head, but they count that as running yards, you know, and you've got to, that's why, but the thing is, most guys that are watching this are not going to look through every box score looking for that stuff. But if you want to, all you do is you get the box score out and you do a word search for team. And team, those things usually go under team stats. Sometimes it'll be under the punter, but you'll see a guy with one rush for negative 20 yards. That's probably a punter, you know, or a field goal, a snapper on a field goal, you know, who has to run with the ball. But if you search for team, you'll get all the fumble, you get all the bad snaps and the kneel downs and the spikes and stuff. You'll be able to find those pretty quickly, but also look at like you said, one for negative 20 yards running. Oh, what was that? And you look up for loss of 20 yards, you search it and you're like, oh, or search the guy's name in the play-by-play and you'll find out if it was random or not. Mostly those are random, but that kind of detail, a lot of people just don't have the time for, and that, you know, but we do. That's our job.
Difference.
Right? Yeah. That's
if it flips 2 games a year, it's enormous in your bankroll.
Yeah.
It's just as simple as that.
Yeah. You can find value with some teams like that. Or like I said, Notre Dame not being good defensively because they face all those backup quarterbacks. I mean, you'll have 1 or 2 teams like that every year where it's like, man, were they lucky. Utah was like that last year too. They faced a lot of backup. They faced a lot of the worst quarterbacks in the teams they played. So
Ron,
watch the games.
Fire away some questions because my remaining questions are a little different themes. So stay on the games itself.
All right. Do you watch the games?
I don't need to. I don't need
to
watch.
Matter?
Your eyes. Some people are like, I like to watch the games because I like to see how it plays out, and I could tell how much a team dominated the line of scrimmage or this and that. Well, that'll be in the stats by block win rates or whatever, rushing yards or whatever. But a lot of times your eyes can fool you. You happen to watch a game and you see this team win 35-10, and man, they're great. That quarterback's unbelievable, and you get in your head you think they're better than they actually might be because you watched one game. Now I don't do that. You guys probably don't do that because we have an analytical. I'll see a team trounce a team, and I'll be like, there's going to be value against that team next week. You know, I'll look at it the other way. But I don't.
You got to separate the two.
Right.
You know,
I don't
because I watch the games
because I don't need to watch the games. Mm-hmm. And that's just not me. But you ever notice that former coaches, former players get on, they get roles as TV analysts and they're picking games against the spread. They're the worst at picking games against the spread. Yeah. They think they know what they're talking about, and they probably do. But they're terrible. And they watch film and they watch every game, and they're terrible at picking games. Yeah. And I hear stuff like, well, this team is, they're plus 10 in turnover margin. They really work on forcing turnovers. Every team works on forcing turnovers. The fact that they're plus 10 is lucky. But they're thinking it's some kind of skill. It's not. Yeah. So every other team's not practicing forcing turnovers. They're not practicing punching the ball. I mean, I don't believe the stuff I hear from former coaches. It's just great. Keep feeding this stupid information to the public, and they're going to believe it. And that's why we have value. Because the public believes one thing that they're hearing from these guys, and we know that's a bunch of crap.
Kansas City's 4-4 with a -9 turnover ratio. It's Pat Mahomes. It's not backup number 3. A brand new offensive line. That's going to change, and it's not built into the fact that they gave up whatever value you give to a turnover. They're going to make up because they're going to go flat or they're going to go plus. They actually went plus.
Right, the rest of the year. Right.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's just and that's just the variance. Understanding the context. There's a difference between a 6-0 team that's plus 12 in turnovers and a 6-0 team that's even in turnovers.
Where did you figure out that the bye week for Philadelphia developed kind of a change in structure for them, where they went from 23 passes a game to 23 runs per game, and then they had that early bye week, new coach. And then they adjusted and they started ramming the ball down people's throats 39 times per game. Did you make an adjustment? Did you see what was going
yeah,
on?
it will take a couple games, but you'll notice that. And a lot of stuff always happens after bye weeks.
Right.
They get a chance to implement part of this, especially new coaches. They'll get a chance to implement part of the offense that they didn't want to put in right away, especially in recent years, because they've had training camps been a little shortened in recent years.
Yes.
They haven't been, and then last year preseason was shorter and less preseason games, so they've had less time to implement their entire package. And then the bye week comes along. It's like, all right, we're going to add something. Now we're going to add stuff, and maybe we need to. Or they've evaluated their season up to that point. And Philadelphia, it's like, we're really good at running the ball. We've got a running quarterback. Let's do that. Normally running is not particularly good in the NFL, but if you got a running quarterback, it is.
You're right.
But otherwise, handing off to a running back is generally not a good idea. But quarterbacks that run, that is valuable. But a lot of those changes are made during the bye week, and I do pay attention. It happens in college too, and I do pay attention to that stuff. It's not, not after 1 or 2 games. They could be random after 1 or 2 games, but it's been like 3 games, and it's a pattern, especially early, like first half. Look at first half running or passing percentages. How many they run? How many? If that has changed, that's something that's more real than, maybe they threw the ball 70% of the time, but maybe they were down by 14 points in the second half. And that had it's first half run rates or pass rates that are more indicative of future. And sometimes you'll notice changes and you can adjust.
How have you been able? I think Ron was mentioning that you've been releasing more and more totals. I don't have a total system. I don't know how to even create it. I know some of the tools of it, but how has that transitioned from over the years? I
changed the ways I predicted plays and pace about 6 years ago, and the totals were good until last year. And last year was the year I sort of ramped it up. I'm like, okay,
oh no, it always
this model's
happens.
working. All right, we got 5 years of data. The totals have been good. The ones I've bet have been 58%. I haven't bet a ton of them. Now I've got enough data to know that the model does work well with totals. And so last year was the year I did more totals, and they were like 20 and 32 or something like that. And the sides were like 60% against the spread, and my totals were terrible. And I'm like, I was still profitable in college football, but it was like, God, if I had just stuck to the sides, I would have had a great year. But then again, there's been years where the totals have been good in recent years and the sides haven't been as good. And I'm like, but I'm reevaluating. I'm adding a model. I mentioned earlier, I'm adding a model that's similar to the NFL model that uses advanced metrics from play-by-play data. So I'm adding that, and hopefully that will help with the totals, or at least it's a different type of model. So I think what it's going to be is a checks and balances sort of thing, where the models are completely different, which I think is good. And it'll be a good way to do checks and balances just to see, if I'm missing something with one model, if the other model is telling me, I'll be able to kind of try to understand where the differences are and make a determination whether it's a good bet or not.
Brian?
I don't know how this fits into metrics or whatever, but it sure was fun for the Big 12 when Oklahoma and Texas decided, hey, we don't need the Big 12 anymore. And every team gave Oklahoma and Texas their best shot. And, it's in the back of my mind. I kind of factored that in. If the matchup analysis said that they could do things on Oklahoma, and especially Texas and their defense, it carried a little weight for me. We got USC and UCLA moving this year, and your school, Cal, wasn't even notified beforehand. How does that even come into play?
How you deal with it? Yeah, speaking of that, I started as a Cal fan. I'm like, what's going to happen to Cal? So I'm on the message boards. I'm trying to figure out what's going on. And some people mention Cal. I was like, Cal, they're not UCLA. I'm like, yeah, we're not, because we've beaten UCLA 3 of the last 4 years, or whatever, or 2 of the last 3 years, and we've beaten USC. So, it's not like USC something like 23-21, or maybe it's UCLA is 23-21 the last 4 years or something like that, and Cal is 22-21 or 20-20. I mean, there's not that much of a difference in performance when people are acting like Cal couldn't sniff UCLA's jock. I'm like, well, we've beaten them 2 of the last 3 years. We've beaten USC recently. I mean, I get what you're saying. They're not the LA market, and they're not as marketable as those teams. But don't start comparing how good Cal is compared to USC. And I'm sure the other teams are Cal's like, what are you talking about? We're not as good as those guys. We've beaten them 2 of the last 3 years. We just beat them, And so there might be something to that. It's not something I'm really going to factor in. It'll show up. If that's the case, then after 3 or 4 conference games, we'll start showing up, and it'll be in the metrics. Yeah. So I'll just let But it could be something to consider. But I don't know. There's really not a huge data set of that, right? You have Texas and Oklahoma last year, and you could probably dig up some other ones from past years. But that's really a small sample to make conclusions.
It was just kind of an aside, and I certainly wasn't comparing Cal to be any better or worse than USC or UCLA. It was just the situation where Cal's going to have extra motivation in these things.
Cal always has extra motivation against the LA schools anyway, because historically, a lot of Cal's recruits are Southern California players who didn't get recruited by UCLA or USC. And so we've always actually played those teams pretty well, especially when we go down to LA, because half our team's from LA, and they've got a chip on their shoulder. So Cal's generally done pretty well against those teams anyway. But yeah, I'm sure the motivation's going to be there regardless.
See, the real reason USC left the conference is they just couldn't compete in baseball anymore. Oregon State was beating them so badly. They went off to the Big Ten. So that's it.
There's been a lot of pushback from USC and UCLA and other sports. They're like, now we're in the best volleyball conference in the country. We're in one of the best baseball conferences in the country. We're almost every other sport. The Pac-12 is the best in the country at all the other sports, the Olympic sports. And all these other people are like, so now our volleyball team has got to go play these teams in the Big Ten, aside from Penn State, Nebraska. A few of them are elite volleyball teams, but now we got half our games there's no competition. We're going to beat the crap out of these teams. A swimming and diving team, you think they're going to, all of the water polo, that's all West Coast dominant. And now they got to go play these shitty teams in the Midwest. So there's a lot of people firing back going, this sucks for our university, except for football and basketball.
Right.
I'd like to really go off the reservation with you. For those out there listening or watching, you were infamous for moving the lines hard, and there was a lot of attention to the market and your picks. I'm curious what kind of issues that you've run into with people either using your picks elsewhere. I know that I was getting your picks before you released them through, creative ways that people work behind the scenes to access.
Yeah, that happened for a while, and I didn't realize that was a thing. That was probably in the late 2000s, I'm guessing. And I didn't realize, and this is a funny story, and you might have got it from the same guys I had. So I had a buddy, really good friend, who was living in Texas. And I'm moving college lines in the mid-2000s, 2.5, 3 points.
Yeah.
Instantly.
It was huge.
And I had this buddy, and they still move. I mean, they still move about a point in the NFL. I'm still getting, they still move in the NFL. I mean, especially totals. But I had a buddy, and he bets like $50 a game. And he's like, "Oh man, I'm getting
He's
bad.
missing the number you gave him.
I'm not around to be on your website when they're released and all this stuff because I used to release on a timer.
Right.
I had different things happening. Like I'd have to load the games in to release them one at a time on the website on a countdown, and you refresh the page and you get the bet. And the problem was then I had people hacking my server and finding out where I had loaded them all. And then as soon as I load them, they all move. And I'm like, oh, shit. That's the time you're talking about. There were guys in Costa Rica, whatever, who would get my plays first. And here's how it happened. I'm like, oh, all right, Chris, I'll give you the plays. You're only betting $50. That's not going to move the market, whatever. But it didn't take them long to figure out there's a guy in Texas betting Dr. Bob's plays before Dr. Bob bets him. It didn't matter that he was only betting $50 a game. They were just matching up perfectly with what I was releasing the next day. And so the line started moving ahead of my release. I'm like, what the hell's going on? And I had a client in Costa Rica who used to work with Pinnacle. It's probably the same guy you got your stuff from. He's like, here's what's going on, Bob. Yeah. I'm like, my friend betting $50 a game in Texas is moving the market.
I knew that. I was told that at the time. They said Dr. Bob's friend is betting this early in this dinky account.
And the thing was, I wasn't even betting them early because I'm betting $5,000-$10,000 a game. I don't want to move the line.
Right.
And
wait a minute. I want to call you on that because I've gone on record.
There were times when I was betting right ahead of release.
Yeah. Well, I think, if you're offering picks, you should have 100% of your bet in and not be giving it to betting groups and people that are going to move the line exponentially.
I don't give them out to anybody ahead of time. I used to bet my games without being sort of naive. I used to bet my games whenever it fancied me. And then, eventually people like, oh, this account is Dr. Bob. And they knew, and then you figure out, what was going on. I'm like, and then the lines would start moving. I'm like, what's going on here? I'm like, oh shit, I'm front running myself. So then I stopped betting the games ahead of time. So now I do it on a text release system, simultaneous text. I got a play coming out. It's in rotation range, 320 to 330. So people can kind of get it on their page. And then I fire out a text, a minute later, and here's the play and whatnot. And then when the text comes in, I count 10 seconds and then I bet the game. And that has not been a problem. And sometimes the line will move on me, but whatever. I mean, I really want my clients to do well. I don't want anybody to think anyone's betting the games or getting the games before they do. So I don't even bet the games until I get the text. But I used to, I didn't know the difference, but I used to, and then people figured it out, obviously, but that stopped. I mean, that stopped at least 10 years ago. Yeah. I don't give them to anybody. And occasionally it's like, oh, Dr. Bob, I'm going to be on a plane. Can I get him a little early? I'm like, and then, damn it, goddamn alignment, and I'm sorry, I can't. I got guys that work with me who don't even get them ahead of time.
Good.
I mean, you do not, the guy, like my NFL guy who works on the NFL with me, does my model with me. He doesn't get the college plays, and he gets them on the text like everybody else. I don't give them out to anybody. So I've learned my lesson. But yeah, that was a guy betting $50 a game in Texas because I felt bad for him because he was getting bad lines. And I had no idea. I had no idea that they were tracking or had an idea that they could piece it together and know this guy. And that was in the years when I had come off like 3 straight years combined of 65% winners in college. And 1 year was 74%.
Yeah, it was huge.
2004, 2005, 2006. I mean, those were, that's when it really got crazy. But that I've stopped front running myself. So my clients, and it's still some, nowadays there are a few. There's one major betting. It's a line service that has a bot that reads my texts and bets them instantly and moves the line instantly. So about 25 or 30% of the books out there are running off of this line service. So some of my clients, if you have one of these books, you're not going to get down at the line and release that, but then get a different book, go to DraftKings or FanDuel or something like that. And those guys are fucking clueless. Excuse my language. But so about 70% of my clients most of them will find a book, or else I'm like, it's not worth subscribing if you're losing 3% of your chance to win after the line moves.
Exactly.
I mean, I still might win 56% or something like that, but it's getting kind of like borderline whether you should even bother with service at that point. You probably should, because if my 56% goes down to 53% and the alternative is you betting yourself and hitting 49%, then yeah, you should probably still go with me. But it's been a problem over the years. It's been a huge headache. It's the worst part of what I do is having to deal with that stuff. I used to just be able to send out an email on Thursday mornings with my picks. And then all of a sudden I send an email out on Thursday morning with all my picks, and people are rushing to bet. I've got like 8 games and they're banging them all at once. And people are like, well, I bet the first 3. And by the time I got to the 4th game, all the lines had moved. I'm like, oh, because they got groups now betting, like, you take the first game, you take the second game, you take the third game, and they're boom. And Billy Walters used to be a client of mine. And his group was getting my stuff like that. And I'm like, I can't do email anymore. I mean, I wish it was back in the day where I could just send out an email at my convenience. And here you go, here are the picks. And people think, oh, it's great. It's great that you move lines. I'm like, no, it's not. It's a pain in the ass. No. I really hate the fact that I move lines. I mean, it's a compliment, and it's one of those things like, you get these guys who are anti what they consider tout. And I sell my picks instead of, making a living betting them. Well, I don't want to live in Vegas. I don't want to be running around looking for runners to bet all my stuff. I mean, it's just a headache. I like living in San Francisco. Now I like living in Colorado. I have a family. I can't be, doing that stuff. So people say, well, if he were any good, he'd bet his own game. Well, I do, but I make a good living selling my picks. But there are people out there who are like, oh, he's a tout. He's not a sharp. I'm like, I move the lines as much as anyone. Like, you're saying I'm not a sharp because I sell my picks? I mean, how single-minded is that? There are some guys that sell picks that are legitimately good handicappers and move the markets, and to get kind of swept under this rug as, oh, he's a tout and he's a crook and I'm like, first of all, a tout is someone who, screams at the top of their lungs and buy my stuff, lock of the year, Vegas Dave and all those creeps. And Vegas Dave, he's talking about stealing my picks. I mean, guys like that have been doing it for years, but they get them after the lines have moved. Yeah. And then they're giving them out to their clients. It's still probably better than what they could do, but nonetheless, it just always bothered me that just because I sell my picks, people bunch me in with all the other handicappers out there who are crooks. And it's like, you have no idea. You have no idea.
You know what? There's no way in hell that if you're essentially the restaurant, do you want fries with that? And that's what it can possibly be. I found that it helped my process amazingly, and I benefit from it. Trying my damnedest and limiting what I'm betting, because I don't sell picks. I sell my bets to follow if somebody wants to. But Ron, go ahead. You've been silent too long.
I just have 2 more. One, the general question, it's really becoming more of a factor to bet while the game's going on. There's so many ways that you can bet, immediately after kickoff, 3 minutes into the game. It's not just waiting to halftime and betting halftime bets. And that was one of the conversations Chris and I have had, and then others have had as well. Well, if you're not watching the games, you're probably not taking part in in-game betting. Is there any sense of you wanting to get into the in-game betting, or whether it be for betting getting a better line or seeing something that happened right away?
Yeah, I have no doubt that I could come up with a model that would beat the market. And most people who are sharp have been doing that with in-game betting, because there tends to be overreactions to early stuff. No doubt. But I do not. I work 110 hours a week. Saturday's my day off. I'm not going to sit there and in-game bet. I have 2 kids that are 5 and 3 and a wife that hasn't divorced me despite my work habits. And I don't want to sit there and go, no, honey, I'm in-game betting now.
I agree. I can't do it. That's just
too much.
Yeah.
Too much.
No.
If all I did was in-game bet, that'd be different.
How about basketball, NCAA basketball? There's some situations for NCAA basketball with fouling and everything else that you could get probably a juicy in-game line.
Probably so. But once again,
time management.
I do work a lot during basketball season, but I do have more time off at night. And my wife has put up with 4 months of football with me working every single night till 3 a.m. or whatever it may be, or 4 a.m. And during basketball season, I do all my work late at night and during the day. And at night, I don't want to sit there and do in-game betting while she wants to spend some time with me. She's already put up 4 months of not spending time with me. And I definitely don't want to do that. I mean, you have to have a balance.
Fair enough. Perfect.
I'm going to go off the reservation again, and I'm going to ask you 3 questions. And is there a question that you're surprised you have not been asked, on an inquisitive nature of all the pods and media appearances? And then this is just opposites. What do you regret the most that you've done in this industry, and what do you take the most pride in or happiest about?
Yeah, I don't know if there's a question I haven't been asked. I don't really think about it that much. I regret probably not betting more in my early days when I had a huge advantage and didn't understand that I had such a huge advantage doing the math I was doing back in the 80s and 90s. I had a huge advantage and didn't fully take advantage of it. So I do sort of.
That's common, though.
Yeah, yeah, and here I am because I'm an investor. I'm not a gambler. I don't have a gambling mentality. I don't need action. I don't need to watch the games I bet on. That's not going to change the result.
Nope.
And I'm money management, and I'm not assuming I'm better than I am. Another mistake people make: they might have money management. They might do Kelly criteria and the whole thing, but they over what they think they're better than they are, and they overstate what their expected win percentage of. And then in the Kelly system, you're going to end up losing your money anyway because you've overstated what your expected win probability is. So I'm always like, well, I've been 56%, but I'm still going to base my money management on 54% going for. Always better to be conservative or use half Kelly or something. So I never bet as much as I should have. And part of it is like, I'm young. I don't have a lot of money to be, betting. I bet what I could afford to lose. But I wish I had more money when I was young to bet more. And the other thing is probably, like I said, front running myself and betting my own games, not realizing that I was moving the market. And as soon as it took me a little bit, I'm like, oh shit, I'm moving the lines. I'll better stop doing that. And I stopped doing it. So I never did it intentionally. It wasn't a greedy thing or selfish thing that I was doing. I just didn't understand that me betting games on these rotating accounts, that it didn't take them long to figure out after 2 weeks that, oh, I've changed my account, but that's Dr. Bob. It just took me a while to realize they could figure it out that quick. But it wasn't an intentional thing, but I do kind of regret not being a little wiser to the way the industry worked.
Well, they're sneaky.
Yeah, sneaky guys.
And proud
what
of.
I'm most proud of, I guess, is being honest and forthright. Like, I don't hide the fact when I have losing seasons. I'll write about that. When I've had great seasons, then the middle of that college season, 2005 or 2004, whatever it was, when I was 74%, I had like a stretch where I was like 5-1, 4-0, 6-1. And I'm like, hey, and I'd write emails like, this is not going to continue. Yeah. Don't ratchet up your bets thinking I'm going to keep winning at this rate. Expect 50 at the time, like 58% was like, I could do that because it was in the 90s. Or 2000, it was easy to win. Like, expect 58% going forward. Don't get carried away. And the next week I went 7-0 or something like that. People like, it cost me money. But I've always been proud of the fact that I've been realistic. And I'm not, when things are really good, I downplay, like, hey, not that I won't market it, but I'll be like, hey, clients, take it easy. When things are going bad, I take it in stride. Clients are bitching. I'm like, last year's NFL, 43-43. I had 1 week where, I had the worst week I'd ever had in 30-something years in the NFL and still was profitable. So I had my worst week ever and still ended up being profitable. But people are bitching. I'm like, you were with me last year when I was 59-27, and now you're bitching at me because I'm 43-40. Like, that's over 60% over 2 years. Like, just check yourself. I've been really good at riding the waves and not overreacting to positive variance, not overreacting to negative variance, staying very steady. That's my nature, being analytical. So I think I'm proud of the fact that I have educated my clients over the years to the realities of sports betting, not overhyped myself when things are going great, and not, been in the dumps when things are going bad. I've stuck to my model. A guy wrote a book and he interviewed me for it based on analytics. He said, Dr. Bob is not the most brilliant mathematician I've ever met in my life, but he's the most confident. Like, confident in his numbers, no matter how bad things might be going in the short term, he always has full confidence that he's going to win going forward. So I stay the course, which is hard to do when things aren't going well, but I know what I do works, and I don't let a half a season of negative variance, what I consider variance, affect what I do. A lot of people like, why use that? That changed the model. Obviously, that model doesn't work anymore. I mean, a model that went 62% last year all of a sudden doesn't work. I mean,
right.
And I guess I'm proud that I move the lines and move the market and have that respect, but it is a pain in the ass. So that's something I would take away if I could.
Part of the job has become you really have to, you have no choice but to spend time to educate the people that follow you, because they have such unrealistic expectations. You have to manage them throughout the whole season sometimes. Ron, what else you got left in your?
I got just kind of one final question before that. Just doing what you do, you have to have a thick skin, first of all. And one of the 10 takeaways people are going to take from this is just how disciplined you have to be to do this.
Yeah.
I talk about this all the time. You have to resist the urge to sit in front of your computer and press an extra 0 in there to make a bigger bet or this or that. And, it's so easy. You're not putting cash on the other side of the table. I think my final question would really be just, what do you think the industry is going to look like, with everything going on in the United States in the next 2-3 years? Where do you think we're going with all this?
I'm not, as you probably could tell, I'm not really tied into what the industry is doing, or else I wouldn't have been so naive to know that my bets were pretty well known, even though I was switching books every other week. So I'm not really tied into the industry that much. I don't really know how, what's going on in the industry.
How about this? Do you see yourself changing?
People are getting more analytical.
Do you see yourself changing the way you're doing your business?
Well, the NFL's already changed the NFL model. This year I'm adding the college model based on advanced analytics to kind of work with my other model. You have to be ahead of the curve. And like I said, the models, my way, I think I do have a methodology in the way I create a model that is going to work no matter what sport I do. But there are smarter people getting into the industry making the lines. But I still have an advantage, and it hasn't changed that much from my long-term win percentages over the last 5 or 6 years. It's been pretty much the same, but I just have to work harder. You have to understand what the market is valuing to understand where to find value. Because a lot of what the market's doing mimics what I'm doing, maybe what you guys are doing. You have to understand where the value comes from. And the only way, like I said, the big part of finding value is, as algorithms become a bigger part of making lines, I could take advantage of that by adjusting for player changes in player personnel, or like I said with Notre Dame, adjusting for the backup quarterbacks that they happen to have faced rather than the starters who were so much better. Like making those type of adjustments, which takes a lot of work, a lot of time. That's where the value is, and you just have to understand what the market's doing to understand where the value is coming from. But I think because I work hard and I understand the modeling process and what the market's doing, I can kind of tell that when the new college basketball model launched a couple of years ago, it's like, oh, the market is doing something very similar to what we're doing here. So we still have to adjust for player personnel. And I spent a lot of time over the years adjusting for that, knowing how to adjust for that, basketball, football. And so I think that's a big part of my value. So I don't think that's going to change anytime soon, because as things get more analytical and more algorithm driven, that kind of value is still going to exist, I think.
I think there's no greater feeling than looking at what the numbers spit out, and for a fact that, oh my God, I didn't realize this team was this good or this bad, and you get a 1 or 2 week jump on the rest of the market. That's just heaven. That's the greatest feeling. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. Last year I was early in the season, Bowling Green is expected to be one of the worst teams in the country. And I was like, I don't know, they brought in a lot of transfers on their defense, and their secondary looks a lot better. And after a couple games, their offense still sucks. But their defense looks pretty solid, and I just kind of, and the underlying analytics supported that. It wasn't necessarily lucky. And I remember they were a 31-point underdog to Minnesota. I was like, Bowling Green is my best bet of the week. And they beat them straight up.
Yeah.
And a lot of the value, and I bet on Bowling Green like a couple weeks, I've been betting on them, and they were covering the spread and winning. And then they win that game straight up. I'm like, well, there goes the value.
Yeah.
Bowling Green. I maybe had some value on their opponent team total under for a while after that. but finding those teams like that is great. And I remember there was a years ago, in the 2000s somewhere, or maybe 2010 or 2000, there was a Penn State team that had come off a couple mediocre years, and it was Paterno's kind of last years. And then they'd made some changes. There was a coordinator change or something, and they had a new quarterback, and they started off really good right away. And I'm like, this is legit. Like they're much better than the 6-6 teams they've been in the recent years. And I had Penn State. I think they went like 10-1 against the spread, or 10-2 against maybe it was an 11-game schedule. And so I think they were 10-1 against the spread. I kind of like by week 4 on, I was just Penn State trained, like just roll it. So you do find about 2 or 3 of those teams a year where it's like, people have no idea. Western Kentucky was my team total over with Western Kentucky.
Right. I know. I got so sick and tired of hearing people betting it, and I'm like, oh, it's got to stop, and it never stopped.
No, that team just.
You mentioned that you had 100% confidence in your NCAA model, but what percentage of confidence do you have in the NFL market? For me, I have 100% confidence, and I just want to know where the line's going to go.
Yeah, well, like I said, after those 12 years, I'm like, God, my old model's not going to do it anymore. The new model is kind of like, we'll see. And it's been better than I thought. Like I said, I'm hoping for 55%, and it's been 58% over 6 years. And it's like, I don't know, what do we have? 600 plays, 600 best bets are 57.8%, and then 400 plus opinions, which are 55.5%. I mean, that's a pretty good sample size. 1,000 games at 57% combined. That's pretty good sample size. So let's just say I have more confidence in the NFL now than I did before. Although every year the market gets smarter. Yeah. There are
lines are moving faster, and
faster. I release a lot of the stuff on Monday morning. Try to get a jump. And I do think last year was an anomaly, like because the year before I had my best year ever. So if I have 2 or 3 years of 53 or 54%, well, then maybe the writing's on the wall that the market's caught up. But I've always adjusted in the past, and we'll see. But as of right now, I think the NFL model is the best thing I've got going.
That's why I feel the same way. It's an investment, and I treat it that way. And I know. You just know when your model's running well, and you know when things are kind of, there's something wrong here.
Right. Even in a down season, they're seeing the 80 or so bets that I'm making, and maybe those are pretty flat, but I'm seeing all 200 and something games and how the model has done in general. Last year in college football, like I said, I had it was 52 and 41 overall, but it could have been better. The model itself, although the totals sucked, the sides were great, and it was even better than it should have been, because I have free analysis on my website where I post predicted scores of all the games that aren't part of my package. And the games with a 4-point difference from the spread or more, I consider those leans. And the leans last year were, 85 and 54 or something. And they've been like 54.5% for 15 years. So they've been really, really good. But last year in particular, over 60% winner, I'm like, God dang. In general, the model had a great year. And, and my season bets, the win totals were 11-0, and the rest of the bets were around 500. And I'm like, but the model worked great overall. It's just the games with the difference between 4 and 6 points were leans weren't as good as the ones where my predictions were 7 points or more away from the line, which normally win more, but last year just randomly didn't. So people are like, maybe the market's caught up with you. I'm like, what are you talking about? In general, all of my games with a significant difference from the line were fantastic. Just the games I chose as best bets on sides weren't. So, so I'm like, I see it. People see kind of a down year, maybe but I'm seeing the whole model as a whole and going, man, the model was great last year. Just randomly, I didn't win as much as I should have on the best bets.
I agree.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Right. And so I understand that, but people are like, but I believe what you want. But I've had sort of mediocre years before, and then the year before the 69% in the NFL, I think it was like 55% or whatever. And I was like, Like, oh, maybe the market's catching up. I'm like, yeah. And then I went 69%. Oh, wow. Now I figured out the secret sauce. Well, no. I mean, it's in the long run, it's gonna even out, and I'm gonna win.
Yeah.
But one year to the next, there's variance, and you can't judge anybody on that. So,
Ron, it's painfully obvious. It's hard to drag information out of Bob. Do you have anything remaining on your plate?
I do not. I do want to thank you so much for giving of your time and your expertise. It reinforces the way I go about doing things. And I think it should be something that people could view and understand not only what goes into it, but, I love the challenge. I love the July and August part of the schedule, sometimes even more than the season, where we're uncovering some sort of nugget. Oh, look what I think about this team. And I appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us.
No, it's nice talking to you guys.
Go ahead, Bob. What do you have all going? How do people find you? What are you up to?
Well, you can follow me on Twitter at Dr. Bob Sports, DRBOBSPRTS. And drbobsports.com is my website. I mentioned free analysis on there. If you don't want to, not a big bettor and you don't want to spend a bunch of money, like my NFL package is $1,500 a year. And the college package is $1,000, $9.95. And if you don't want to spend that much money, that's fine. I mean, you'll make money on it. If you're betting a decent amount, you'll most likely to make money with the service. But I have tons of free analysis on the site too. And like I mentioned, those leans in college football in particular have been profitable for a lot of years. Not as good a percentage as the best bets, but profitable. And you can just do that. It's on the site for free. You don't have to pay anything. And the NFL analysis that's on the site for free, those games are analyzed fully. About half the games are not bet, and those are on the site. And there's matchup analysis. A lot of people told me, like, for fantasy football, they're like, "Whoa, I didn't realize that the Rams and Cooper Kupp are going against the number one nickelback in the league. So maybe Cooper Kupp's not going to have as big a game as normal." And like finding information like that has helped their fantasy stuff. So a lot of stuff you can read. I don't have time to write up every single college game like I used to. I used to write up every single college game, but now I have 2 little kids and a wife who I want to spend some time with them, so I don't have time to write up every college game. But some of them on the free analysis pages in college I am writing up, especially the early week games. I'm doing a little write-up. But you'll learn stuff as you go, and you don't need to pay for anything. But if you're more serious about it and you read my site and money management articles and see my past performance and you're interested, then you can sign up for packages and probably do well.
We definitely are grateful for the time that you've spent with us, especially since you didn't know us. And well, now you probably want to forget me at least. But you know what? I feel like such a turd because Gil Alexander introduced us, and I had planned on mentioning his podcast with you in the past, and a lot of other good podcast content all in a row, like we've done this summer. So I'm mentioning it at the end. That's all I can do. So
yeah, Gil's a pioneer in sports analytics, and I'm glad to see him on a platform on VSiN that he can interview all these knowledgeable people and give all this information to the masses. But he was doing this 12, 15 years ago and interviewing guys like me and doing these. They weren't video podcasts like you're doing. But still, the information was great back then. I think, the stuff I did on the first podcast I did with him was maybe a dozen years ago or something. It's still, the stuff I talked about then probably still applies. And, a lot of it, I've talked about here, but he was the pioneer, and, he's, so I'm glad you gave him that recognition because he deserves it.
Yeah. And, I listened to that podcast and I didn't realize it wasn't a year old. I mean, it's worth going and chasing that to listen to also. And it made it really rough on us because typically we're trying to make the content 100% original, and there's just no way to do it with you. But that podcast is relevant today. So I suggest people seek that out, and then some of his other very high quality podcasts. Again, Bob, thank you very much. It's sad to end this. Very grateful you joined us, and we'll be back as quickly as we can with some other additional content. So thanks for everybody watching. Don't forget to subscribe and Venmo Ron money. Let's see you guys later.